and thank you for joining us today on #NoLimits. I'm your host, Shelley Kenow. #NoLimits is about people that society puts limits on, but who have busted through those limits. Ophelia said in Hamlet, "We know what we are, but not what we may be." I believe this to be true, and that there is no better example than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. The caterpillar literally dissolves and its cells reform into a butterfly. As the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, it has to struggle in order for its wings to be strong enough to fly. Obviously, this is no easy process, but neither is breaking through limits society has put upon someone. But just like the caterpillar, when we believe in ourselves, we can accomplish more than others might think. If we have a support system around us to encourage us and facilitate that growth, even better. One area that I didn't even know there were limits on, but I have found out in the last couple of years, is on children and adults who have autism and preparing for the financial future of all people with special needs. And that brings me to my guest today. Dennis is a husband, a father of two, and a financial planner specializing in special... So, Dennis, welcome. You are the first dad to officially be part of #NoLimits. So thank you for breaking that limit. And please tell us more about yourself and your family.
Great. Thanks, Shelley. My name is Dennis Farrar. My wife, Cynthia. I have two children, Tim and Colleen. Tim was my firstborn, and he was, both my children were born in Indianapolis. Tim has a form of autism that they no longer even diagnose today. It was called PDD back then, but now he's just on the spectrum. But we didn't really find out about his autism because, he was our firstborn, and as he was growing up, we were just watching those little milestones, and we thought everything was just working just fine. He may have been a couple weeks or maybe a month or so behind what some people would say, but he looked and acted like a perfectly normal little boy. So, I have a daughter. She's in Lindenwood College right now. She's, I think you would call it a senior, but I think she's on a 6-year plan.
Yeah. Some degrees are like that. And some students are like that. Maybe it's not her degree path, but...
My wife, she works at, she's a dietary supervisor at a retirement village here in Eureka, Missouri. So That's a little bit about me.
All right. So how old was your son, you said, when he was diagnosed?
Well, when he was actually diagnosed, it was about year 4, right? Okay. Well, the way it happened was we let Tim go to a Montessori school, and he was at the Montessori school for probably 2 or 3 weeks when the teachers kind of called us up and said, your son is kind of displaying some autistic tendencies. And we were kind of like, what? What do you mean he's displaying autistic tendencies? He doesn't have the typical autistic, like waving of hands or, things that I would have kind of noticed as being autistic. But the teachers that are kind of specializing in that figured out at about 4. So then we took him to a doctor, and that's when he was diagnosed with PDD.
So there's a couple things that you probably saw me look off to the side. I wrote down because I wanted you to explain those a little bit more. You talked about a Montessori school, and you talked about PDD, and you haven't explained what PDD stood for. I know, like you said, it's not in the diagnosis anymore, but if people, because I actually know someone who was also diagnosed with that, and so maybe they don't call it that anymore, but I like to I don't like acronyms because not everybody knows what they mean, so I always try to explain them.
PDD is pervasive developmental disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder, like I said, it no longer exists anymore, so it's just on the spectrum. Basically, with the form of autism that Tim has, he's extremely high functioning, right? So if you are talking with Tim and it's a topic that he enjoys, you'll be able to have a back and forth conversation, and you'll have a meaningful conversation with him. On the other hand, if it is a topic that he does not have any interest in, he'll just walk away from you and go and just kind of go into his own little world, right? So,
Right. Yeah, the person that I'm thinking of, she also had NOS, which is not otherwise specified, behind the PDD. So, yeah, that's all been absorbed under the autism spectrum umbrella. So you also mentioned Montessori. What's a Montessori school? How is that different than just an average public school or private school?
yeah, it's kind of a private school. It has a little bit of a religious undertone to it, but it's not really a religious type of a school. It's kind of like a preschool, but they just do things just a little bit differently there. So, and I think there are Montessori schools in the St. Louis area as well. But the school that we chose to put Tim in was a Montessori school.
Yeah, and I think they have them throughout the country. I don't think it's just here in the Midwest. And Marie Montessori is who was the founder of those schools. And a long time ago, kind of the idea behind it was to work a little bit more with our special needs population in order to let them work at their own pace.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do lots of different activities that maybe a public school can't do, because typically the classroom sizes used to be smaller. What was Tim's, I cannot talk today. What was Tim's class sizes when he went through there?
Yeah, Tim's class size was probably about 18.
Oh, okay, that's pretty big.
So it was a pretty big school. So yeah, I think he had about 18 in his class.
Okay. So that's like I mean, for the area where I live, a typical class size is anywhere from 15 to 25. So, and that's in the public schools. So that's a pretty good size for a private school.
Yeah, and this was obviously about 20 some odd years ago as well. So
yeah, yep. So having autism, what kinds of ways did that affect your son? I mean, you talked about the conversation, and that's it today as an adult, but like, did you feel that there were limits placed on him growing up that maybe as your daughter then came along and grew up didn't have placed upon her?
Yeah, I would say that the way that Cynthia and I kind of approached this is that we wanted to make sure that we didn't put limits on him, right? So we treated him as, just our son, right? He was our son. And we were going to let him go at his pace, but we were going to push him a little bit. I tell a funny story. When we first got him diagnosed, a doctor told me, and this fit my personality perfectly. Doctor told me, goes, there's one thing that you can do to kind of pull him out, right? Because he would go into his own little world. You can kind of pull him out. And the doctor told me, he goes, if you're driving in your car and you look over to the side, and where I lived in Indiana, there was livestock, and you see a cow, right? Look over and say, Tim, look at the horse. Okay. So what that would do is Tim would look over and he would see this cow and he would say, well, my dad just said, look at the horse. So it kind of forced him out a little bit. So, so that way he would say, wait a minute, Dad, I don't see a horse. I see a cow. Right.
Right.
I just forced him out a little bit. Now, granted, me being, like I said, my personality, I kind of took liberty with that a little. And I went a little bit more. I had a little fun with that. Let's just put it that way. But no, we actually did. We didn't want to put any limits on him. We didn't want to say that he had limits, but yet we didn't want to push him beyond what he was comfortable with at the same time, right? So we just wanted to find where his comfort level was, and he eventually he came out. I mean, he works a job about 20 hours a week. He does really good at that. So I think that the way it all worked out, I think he did pretty well, right? So he doesn't have any real limits placed on him, except that, we're his guardians and we will always be there for him. But we really do try to not put limits on him.
Right. That's excellent. And I'm glad to hear that, it sounds like you and your wife are on the same page, and that your doctor, I really like that approach. I've never heard that before, of a way to pull someone out of kind of withdrawing, and to get them to talk a little bit more. So that's fabulous. It's really helpful the more people you can get on the same page, in raising, no matter who the child is, whether that's your typically developing child or not. I think that's extremely beneficial. And it sounds like the school systems. So how long, you said he was at the Montessori school for how long? Just a couple years?
Yeah, he was at that Montessori school for probably only about a year before we got him involved in the special school district of in Indianapolis. And then it was really shortly after that because our support system, because one of the things that we kind of found is that we really wanted a support system. And I took a job in Indianapolis when my wife and I were first married, and we just moved to Indianapolis because, we were mobile. We just got married. We could go anywhere we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
The support system was really back here in St. Louis. So we moved back here to St. Louis to be with the support system. And then we got Tim involved in the special schools of St. Louis. So we were only in Indiana probably about a year after he was diagnosed.
Oh, okay. And so I presume, being in the special school district, that he was accepted and welcomed wherever he went within the school systems. And oftentimes the limits that are placed on kids, or anybody actually, aren't spoken about. They're sort of in people's minds. Mm-hmm. So was it ever hinted, or were you ever told directly, he's never going to live independently. He's never going to hold a job. He's just, were those kinds of things ever placed on him that you can recall?
Well, he's always been pretty high functioning, but one of the things that, I think you'll find a lot of parents run into is that trying to find that happy medium with the medications.
Uh-huh.
When he was young, he was put on a medication. I think it's called Tenet. I think it's Tenet. It's been a while since he's been on that one. Mm-hmm. But it actually made him sleep during the day. No matter when we gave it to him, we would try giving it to him at night, and it wouldn't matter. He would be awake all night and then sleep all day at school. So we worked really hard with the school district to try and, get those kinds of things. But at some point, they just kind of said, okay, Tim's going to go off and take a nap for a while.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you have to, because you're just fighting a battle that it's pointless.
Yeah. Yeah. So we probably battled the medication thing for several years. It took a couple of years to get to where we found that the dosage and the time to give it to him and all that kind of stuff, to where he could actually do the schoolwork. But because I think of that, he had a little bit lower expectations than his wife and I kind of felt he should be on. We knew he could do it, right? Mm-hmm. So we actually had him in Sylvan for a couple of years as well, just to try and catch him up. Mm-hmm. And but Tim, while he was in Sylvan, he's one of those guys that he'll manipulate you. He really will. And he would sit there and he would tell the instructors, oh, this is just a little bit too hard for me. Can you help me out here? Blah, blah, blah. And so we noticed that his progress wasn't going like we wanted it to. And so we sat down with the Sylvan educators, and we finally came to the conclusion that they were helping him too much. Yep. So we basically said during his last 6 months, no, you will make him do the work. Just make him do the work. He can do it. He knows he can do it. And we saw that his progress actually did increase significantly when we told the teachers to not, don't just fall in love with this little personality that's going to try and manipulate you, because he's trying to manipulate you into doing his work for him. And we found that he was able to do a lot from that point forward.
Well, that's interesting, because that's kind of one of those limits that I think people have and they don't realize that they have, where maybe because they knew he was someone who had autism, that they felt like, oh, I need to, I don't know that they always give everybody maybe the kind of help that they gave to Tim. So that would be interesting for me to find out, because that is something that I've often talked with other teachers about and other paraprofessionals, is how much is too much help? Because we do want our students to be as successful as they can be on their own with supports, and so trying to find that fine line between when we're enabling versus equipping, or, when we're holding their hand instead of picking them up and carrying them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that I think people's just kindness of their heart, they don't want others to struggle. Right, and so when they feel or see that someone is struggling, they want to jump in and help oftentimes. So
I agree. And, I don't fault them for what that,
right.
Was. It was just more that we believed, because we know from being, the parents, we believed that he was capable of a little more than he was actually showing. And we found out why.
Right. You were correct.
And we modified a little bit, right? It's just like when you go into an IEP and you'll figure out that, oh, you know what, we can modify this and maybe get some better improvements or some different outcomes. That's what his mom and I did with the Sylvan, is we kind of took charge of that and got it addressed.
Good. All right. So fast forward to, he turns 18.
Yep.
He becomes a legal adult. Did he stay in school until before his 22nd birthday, or did he leave school around however old he was, around graduation time?
Yeah, I found that there are people that look at this. Everybody has their own personal, unique way of looking at it. We allowed Tim to stay in the special school district until that year of 21, right? Because the skills that he was learning after he finished the high school setting, the skills he was learning was, to me, life skills, right? The things that I really thought was very important for him, especially for those times when his mom and I aren't there, right? So we do everything we can to try and have him put an effort in to do things for himself a lot. And I thought that the skills that they were teaching him after that high school setting were really pretty valuable for him. So
good. Yeah. And exactly what you said. It is a individual, personal decision. And each family has to make that on their own for that individual child. So one limit that I truly had no idea about until I met you was the limits of financial needs of a person with a disability. And now that your son is in his 20s, you have had to go through a major process to be able to feel confident and comfortable about his financial future. So can you walk us through some of the things that you have had to do in order to feel comfortable and confident?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So the biggest thing is that when we got our financial estate in place, when we told the attorney that we had a special needs child, they kind of made mention that, well, do you have this thing called a special needs trust in place? And we were like, no, what's a special needs trust?
Right.
How does that work? Right.
Right.
Because one thing I will always tell people is that there is no handbook, right, for doing this. Right. And I've always asked people for the handbook. And recently somebody came to me and said, of all the times that all the work that I've done to find all these different resources, I need to just write the handbook. And, I'm considering it, but anyway, in the process of talking to the attorney, we talked about a special needs trust. And what a special needs trust is, it basically, after the caregivers are gone, it provides a couple different things. One, there will be a bit of money that goes into this special needs trust to provide for those things that government government programs does not, right? So government programs like your SSI and stuff like that, they're going to provide for the basics of food, clothing, and shelter, right? Which isn't a lot of money. But when we're gone, the amount that he gets with SSI is just not going to cover what he needs. So we went on ahead and we developed a special needs trust, which in our case, it's going to be funded after we're gone. And then he will actually receive an inheritance, but he cannot directly receive the inheritance. If he directly receives the inheritance, he will lose his government support, right? So
Okay.
the attorneys kind of started to guide us through what it is that you need to do to make sure that there's enough money in place to take care of his needs, but yet he still receives the government support he's been getting. And for a lot of parents, it's not just SSI, but it could be Medicaid and it could be other things like that, right? So I've actually worked with a lot of parents on making sure that they are able to maintain their government resources, their government program support, and still have money to do the things that SSI won't cover. Because again, it's just the basics.
So SSI, Social Security Income?
Supplemental security income.
Okay, supplemental security income. So did you have to do anything special with paperwork or anything in order for Tim to even get that to begin with?
Right. So before the age of 18, in order to apply for and be accepted for SSI, the government, which is the Social Security Administration, the government is going to look at the resources and the income of the parents.
Okay.
So it's about, I think that it's very close to like $750 a month, which is what SSI pays on a monthly basis. Again, that is to cover just the basics. And I will say this: if you have a two-parent family, the person who has the most patience is the person who should speak with Social Security. Because it is not necessarily the easiest thing to get through, because they audit, and which I'm kind of glad. You don't want
For sure.
people who make millions of dollars receiving a lot of
right. Government assistance,
right? So they do continually monitor, the resources to determine if someone is eligible for the support, right? And I come into situations all the time where I talk to families and they say, "Oh, I think this SSI thing is a scam because they came to me and they said I owe them this much money back." And I say, well, first of all, SSI is not a scam. It's a very important thing that your child is going, the individual who's going through this is going to need at some point. But there are some tricks to it. Like, for instance, on those months where your child might be working a job, or when the parents might be working a job, and they have a 3-paycheck month instead of a 2-paycheck month. Now, all of a sudden, the Social Security doesn't necessarily look at the flow. They look at the monthly income. Mm-hmm. And monthly income pushed you over the threshold, and therefore, this month, you are no longer going to receive that particular check. Now, again, Social Security, you got to have patience with them, because believe it or not, then you're going to have a month where you have a 2-paycheck month where it got spread out just the wrong way, and you have a lot less in that month than you would have had normally. And they'll basically come back and they say, "Oh, well, you know what? You didn't earn that much this month, so we're going to go ahead and pay you a little bit extra this month." So it's one of those ebbs and flow type of things. You have to have patience with Social Security, but I also will say, talk with them. Don't just listen. Don't just get a letter and expect the letter to be what it is. Go and talk with the people, and they're people. They'll work with you, but it definitely takes a lot of patience to work with them.
As it does with probably every government office.
I'm not the one with the patients, so my wife is the one that works with Social Security. There's this thing called a representative payee. That's the person who actually talks with Social Security on a monthly basis to report income and resources.
So you have your daughter,
Yep.
whom I am sure loves her big brother. So why wouldn't it be okay to just say, she's going to get everything and she'll take care of Tim when we're gone?
That's an excellent question. And please don't take this wrong, but please do not do that. The reason why is because, yes, Colleen loves her brother, and Colleen is going to be the successor guardian when my mom or when Cynthia and I are gone. And so she will be the person that does what Cynthia and I are doing now. But there are all kinds of pitfalls. One of them is she could get married. And now all of a sudden, any inheritance that I give to Colleen might get used up. It's supposed to go to Tim, but it might get used up for things that Colleen needs. Colleen might become disabled herself someday. Colleen might get sued. Colleen might just be absolutely horrible with managing money. There are all kinds of different pitfalls that I would say that, and in the way that, the group of people that I work with, that's called disinheriting the child, right? And basically having a sibling or some other trusted caregiver to do that. And I can tell you that every intention is, the heart is in the right place, but there are just way too many things that could go wrong, which to me says you need to have that special needs trust in place, because the special needs trust not only is going to provide the resources, it's also going to have sections in there that says this is going to be used to provide for this. This is going to provide for this. This is going to provide for this. So it can get very, very specific. And there's also something attached to that called a letter of intent. And the letter of intent will basically give the caregivers, including anybody, advocates, groups, anything that says, okay, these are his doctors. These are the TV shows that they like. These are the interests and the hobbies and things like that. So all of that is pre-written down so that if for some reason something were to happen to Colleen, right, and she could no longer take care of it, then somebody else would have to step in. And now it's all written down and everything is ticked and tied, and Tim gets taken care of.
That's awesome. This all sounds like it's cost you a lot of money, though, over the span of your lifetime. Because I'm thinking about people who, my husband and I thankfully have been able to put some money aside for our own retirement. But I know a lot of people who don't do that. And I know a lot of people who can't do that because they are just living from this paycheck to this paycheck and the bills are barely paid now. Mm-hmm. So how does someone who's in that position, is it worth it for them to go through all of what you're telling me you went through for Tim?
It is, because what you're going to find is that Social Security will be, they're going to be selective, and they're going to be, they're going to have some limits on things. So you'll want to make sure that you are working with someone that can help you with those limits. For instance, and this is just my circumstance. I don't want to say that I'm a lawyer or giving legal advice or anything. But when I put all of my assets, including my home, my cars, my bank accounts, and everything inside of my living trust, now the only thing that the government could really look at was the income that I made. Right, that was the only amount of resources, which, believe it or not, Tim actually qualified for a certain amount, not the full ride, but he qualified for a certain amount of SSI, the supplemental income. He qualified for that when he was still only 17. right?
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that, we believe, is because all of the assets that we owned that would have been counted against us went and into our trust, and therefore, we didn't have to worry about it. I can say that it, depending on the attorney that you choose, and I recommend using an attorney for that. There are some that cost a little bit of money, and then there are some that are, I know legal services that help people in the circumstance that you were talking about, living paycheck to paycheck. But the most important thing is we want to have these kind of planning things set up, because we're not going to be here the whole
Right.
time. Our children are most likely going to outlive us, right? And we want them to have some level of support once we're gone. And I do, as a kindness of my heart type of a thing, I do help other people with getting a hold of the right resources. I mean, I've not only the only thing that I say is that once you have your medical diagnosis, then I'll help find you resources to go and layer on top of that. But it all starts with the medical diagnosis. But I help people find resources all the time, both community-based, social-based, legal, and so I do help people find that. And for that matter, financial. I do help people find the right financial people to talk to, and making sure that it all gets set up. So I do that out of the kindness of my heart to help people do that
Right.
all the time.
And that's the kind of the idea of the hashtag no limits, is that, if you've been down the road, that you can hopefully go back and help. I cannot talk today. Those who are maybe starting or not as far as you are on that walk, because there are so many paths or detours. I don't know what would be a good descriptive for once a child with special needs. I mean, when they're in preschool, when they're in elementary, when they're in middle school, when they're in high school, and then, that's where I've always focused as a teacher, is just, helping them get through that part of their lives.
Yep.
But when you think about it, that's 13 years of a person's life, and out of their first, 18 to 22 years. And then, the average lifespan anymore is 70, I think. And depending on, maybe the disability, it might not be that long, but they're still going to have most likely many more years out of school than they did in.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that I have gotten out of focusing on that bubble in their life, I'm finding all these things, like, going into group homes and what the thought processes are that some families go through for that, and what the financial responsibility is in regards to that. And, once I met you a couple of years ago, learning about what you've all gone through with your son, as far as the trust and the special needs trust. In case anybody just popped on, I don't want you to think he doesn't trust his son. It was a different definition of the word trust there. But even like some of the families that I have kept in contact with, the filing for guardianship, and the need and the understanding of that, how does that play? And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, if you could explain that, because I'm sure you'll explain it better than I can, because you've, had to think about it probably.
Yep, I've lived it. So when Tim was turning 18, pretty much guardianship was the way to go for someone in Tim's condition. Now, Tim, like I said, he's pretty high functioning. There is a new thing that's just a couple of years old called supportive decision making. It allows the child to still retain some level of they have the ability to make decisions on their own without having a guardian behind them. Now, there is still a semi-legal document that kind of says what types of decisions this person is allowed to make on their own, and then what types of decisions that they're allowed to make with support, which would be some sort of a caregiver. But the way that Tim's mom and I chose to do was we did the guardianship. And guardianship is, to me, an extremely important decision to make. And I would say that I would talk with anybody about it if they wanted to talk about it. It's not a fun process by any means, because not many people know that you have to sue your child. And I will say that please don't look at it as a bad thing. It's actually a very, very good thing. And the reason for that is because the reason that your child might be disabled is because they might have been involved in some sort of a accident which caused them to be in the condition that they're in. And they might have a huge settlement that kind of sits behind them. Excuse me, my wife loves Christmas music, so. Okay. See if that fixes that. I apologize for that.
Okay.
But with the guardianship, what we did, we sued our child, and since Tim wasn't in that situation, we never thought about it. But let's just say that that same accident that caused Tim to be disabled just so happened to kill both my wife and I. Right now, Tim needs a guardian, and because there's this big settlement sitting behind him, almost anybody that had interest in Tim could go through the guardianship process and try and get guardianship of Tim without having any at all indication of what Tim's needs were or his best interest. Mm-hmm. So the reason that you do the legal process as you do is so that a court of law can determine if the person who is applying for the guardianship has a vested interest in the person who they're applying for the guardianship to be, and not just any resources that might be sitting behind that. So even though it is a heart-wrenching process, it's a very necessary process. It's a one-day thing, but it's heart-wrenching, and you will it's difficult, right? Because I was sitting on one side of a courtroom, and my son was sitting on the other side of a courtroom with his own lawyer, and I couldn't talk to him when he had a question. He had to talk to someone who he'd only met once in his life.
Right.
And, so he's 18 years old and didn't quite understand everything that was going on. But so I would say that it's not a fun process, but it's a necessary process, especially for those that are not very high functioning. But I will also say that just kind of remember that we're, at the age we are, we're probably still going to outlive our son. So we need to have this thing called a successor guardian set up ahead of time so that same process doesn't need to happen again. So my daughter is the successor guardian for Tim. She knows everything as she's supposed to do. We have all the legal documents already set up and ready to go. So, yep, I'd say that's definitely a big one to plan for, because those legal decisions need to be made.
Right. Yeah. And that's just one more thing that families who have someone with a special need in them go through and have to think about. That, I mean, my daughter's going to be 21 in a couple of months, and I didn't have to think about that when she turned 18.
Yep.
Had it not been for my knowledge and my relationships with some of the families, like I said, who I helped get through school, I wouldn't have any idea, and I feel like that has to be traumatic, not just for the parents, but for the student as well,
Mm-hmm.
And especially for several of the families that I'm aware of that had to go through this, their child was not probably really understanding or even remotely understanding, what was happening and why it was important. So I just feel like that has to just be one more, and it's a limit, but it's a good limit. I mean, there are some things that we do have to have limits on.
Certainly. Like I said, I fully embrace the need behind it. I just wish there was a more pleasant way to go through it. Right.
Right.
But I fully embrace what's going on and understand it. I believe it's necessary. It is not a pleasant day.
Right. And I mean, you say it's one day as far as the day in court, but you had, I'm sure, more than one day prior to that, getting all the documents ready, because from my understanding, there's other people that have to be contacted, as far as like, if you were divorced, especially, that they would reach out to the other parent, they reach out to any siblings, just to make sure that, like you said, you are on the up and up in wanting to be this person's guardian.
And not only wanting to be, but have the resources and the ability to do it. Right. So there's you're right. There's a lot more than just a day. The good thing is that my wife and I, we went through this, just headstrong into it. We actually started investigating it a year, when he was 17 years old. And, we got a hold of a lawyer, and he looked at us and he said, you know what, I'm glad you're getting ahead of this, but come back to us when he's 3 months away. We'll be able to get all this done ahead of time in just no more than 3 months. Because, you're right. They will get a hold of any interested parties, any parties that need to be reached out to. If it's a really bad situation, they'll have to reach out to doctors. They'll have to do all kinds of things like that. But honestly, with Tim, it was really just a few really just meetings with our attorney. That attorney introduced us to Tim's attorney, and so it was pretty straightforward on our end. But absolutely, there are circumstances where it can be a lot more complicated.
So you have a lot of knowledge on the back end now because you've gone through a lot of these things. Were you in, or was your wife working in the field that you knew that this needed to be done? Or how did you know that you needed to do those steps? I mean, was there an agency that was helping you? Like I said, were you guys employed in a business that said, hey, you probably need to do this? Because again, I'm thinking about all these families that I've worked with, and some of them did not know about the guardianship, and I know a lot of them don't know about a special needs trust, or, they're thinking, oh, well, there are siblings, and the siblings are just going to, they've already said they'll take care of the one who needs it. So how did you find out about all of that stuff?
Like I said, there is no handbook.
Right. Exactly. That's why. Yeah. I mean, where did you go?
I guess just the inquisitive person inside of me kept wanting to get ahead of things.
Okay.
So I'm a kind of guy that I want to get ahead of it. I want to get, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? So I'm always trying to get ahead of things. So I'm always asking questions, right? What is this? What happens next? Who do I talk to do that? And so a lot of the people that would give me advice were people in the special education group. So the teachers and the administrators would give me some, because I kept on asking questions, and then they'd say, well, I don't know, talk to this group over here.
Right. Because I had parents ask me those kinds of questions too. And I've never taught at the high school level.
Right.
So, there were times when they would ask me, and where we live, I mean, you're closer to the big city than what I am. And I mean, we really have very few resources out this way. And so I'd like, well, try this place.
Yeah. Well, because I'm the kind of guy that loves to get ahead of things, I have a whole big list of resources that I have behind me. For instance, if you haven't heard of them, there's this fantastic organization called St. Louis ARC, ARC. ARC is, that their whole job is to help individuals and parents to navigate this time, right? So they are a big help, a big resource for people that might be in that inquisical, want to know what to do next. There are also, we got Tim involved with a community-based sports program called Challenger Baseball. And what Challenger Baseball allowed me to do was not only get Tim to participate in a sport, and in that sport, everybody with every kind of special need, they're on a baseball field and they're all playing baseball. And everybody is just, it's a wonderful thing. But the great thing about that is, guess who's sitting, on my right shoulder? Someone else who's gone through it as well. So what am I doing? I'm asking questions. Hey, what about this? What about that? What about this? So I have learned a ton about this simply by asking questions. There is no, once you're on the road, there are no road signs.
Right.
There's no, the speed limit is this.
Right. Exactly.
There is nothing out there for this. So it's just a matter of, being involved with your child, walking that path with them, and making sure that they will never walk it alone, at least for as long as you can do it, right? They'll never walk it alone. My son knows that I'm always going to be there. His mom's always going to be there. And by the way, he's a mama's boy. So I don't necessarily feel guilty about it, but there are days that I think that if I were not in the picture, he'd be fine. He is a mama's boy. So, but that's okay. We definitely have our relationship, and he can come to me. He comes to me all the time. We're just we're doing great. But the biggest thing is I'm involved, and the more that you're involved, hopefully the more questions you ask. The more questions you ask, the more people you'll meet. The more people you meet, the more questions you ask. And it becomes,
right? Yeah, kind of.
It just kind of becomes a cycle, right? And once you start being introduced to all those resources, you just kind of go, wow, how did I not know about this? Why is this not advertised? Why is this not publicized? Why don't more people know about this? And it's just because there is no handbook.
Right. Yeah. Well, we have about 13 minutes. I always have to end before an hour, just because I'm not an editor, and I can't necessarily go in and take bits out and make it short enough so that it fits in some other formats. So is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to share about your journey with your son?
Yeah, there's always kinds of things that I like to talk about with him. First of all, he does accept challenge pretty well. So we can challenge him, and he accepts that. It's from the perspective of the limits, right? Mm-hmm. When you challenge him, you'll find out where any breaking points are. Mm-hmm. And if it's a breaking point today, it may not be a breaking point next month. It may not be a breaking point 2 years from now. So Tim accepts challenges a lot. And I'm grateful for that, because it allows me to find out where his limits are and things like that. For instance, I found out that he will never drive. And the reason that I found out he will never drive is because I took him on a parking lot and said, let's learn how to drive. Right. And by the time that little lesson was over, he said, Dad, I'm never going to drive again. And I'm like, Tim, that's fine. You never have to drive again. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that. So now he has an adult tricycle, and he loves his adult tricycle. It gives him a sense of independence,
Mm-hmm.
that he can now get from here to work on days that are not rainy and cold and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a sense of independence. Today he rode his bike to work. So we love finding out just how independent that he can be, but then we will never make him sit on an island. All right.
Right.
So that's one thing about Tim. One thing I love about Tim is that he has several interests, and if you talk to him about those things that interest him, you will never know that you're talking to an autistic child. And my favorite topic that he loves is Pacific World War II.
Oh,
You can talk with him, and he talked with a historian on the USS Texas down in Houston. He talked to the historian of that ship for 2 hours. And
wow.
they talked, and it was a great experience for Tim, but it was also a great experience for the historian, because for the most part, the historian's job is to point people. Yeah, that tour starts over there. Um, in 20 minutes, this is going to happen here. Oh, you look at the bathrooms are over there. That's the job of the historian most of the time. Well, when my son went in there, the historian brought out his books, and they went through these books for 2 hours, and the
Wow.
historian just had a wonderful time going through it. And Tim is extremely respectful with that kind of thing. It almost warms my heart that that's one of the things that he's very, very into. Now that said, some of his other topics he loves: Star Trek. Do not do that to my son if he does it back to you, or you will get stuck in a 2-hour conversation and not want to get involved in. But if I'm ever there, I will always go up to the person that I call Hornswoggles. I'll go up to that individual and say, Tim knows that if you need to go, just say, Tim, I'm done. I have to go. And
That's good.
He'll be done. Right.
That's good. Yeah.
It's one of those things that we've conditioned him. Also, we have to tell, and because who wants to be sitting there going like, dude, I can't do this.
Right. Yeah. After this, that's as far as I'm like. I don't know anything else. So,
but
and I don't necessarily need to know.
If you respond to that, he will be on you, and he will be on you hard. So I have to just prepare people for that. But so there's just a couple of things like that he really, really enjoys, and he can engage in two-way conversations and things like that. But then there are other things that are just kind of normal, everyday types of things. He will just crawl into his own little world, and he'll just hang out there for a while. So that's where those little tricks that the doctor talked to me about, kind of trying to pull him out of his world. I do it all the time. I have my own little tricks that I can pull him out and prevent him from kind of getting stuck. Right.
Yeah.
I always want to see him advancing, and I'm never gonna put him in a situation where he's going to advance faster than he's capable. But I always want to see him that he's advancing, and that he doesn't get stuck. So it's that's the biggest thing. Now, I will say Colleen, when she was young, she had a language delay. So it wasn't that she had any physical or mental really disabilities, but she had a language delay.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to work with Colleen through the special school district up until about age 12 or 13 before she actually kind of caught up. So I've experienced that part as well. Not quite special needs, but needing a little bit more help than some others.
Right. And that's still considered a special need. Anything outside of what the majority of the population receives is what's considered a special need.
Yeah. And the good news is that with the proper help, we recognized what she needed, got her the help, and now she's a college senior, right? Doing just fine on her own. So in her case, that limit was overcome, and she took care of that, with our help, but she got that taken care of, and now it's behind her.
Yeah.
That first year of college was a bit of a struggle, but she got through that too, and now we're good there. So I'm happy to if anybody wants to just reach out to me to find out what I did to help Tim and for that matter Colleen in finding the resources. Like I said, I'm trying to be the one that writes that handbook.
Mhm.
One other thing, just real quick, when people say special needs trust, I'm going to try and keep this real short. There are three different kinds of special needs trust,
Okay.
and one of them is one where the special needs individual receives money themselves. So if you have like a grandparent that wants to gift the child some money, do everything you can to get a hold of that grandparent quickly and say, do not uh, give the individual that money, give it to a trust, or maybe something like even an ABLE account, which is something we didn't even get a chance to talk about.
Right.
Find a way to give the child the money in a third party special needs trust. Otherwise, it becomes a first party special needs trust, and all kinds of problems happen there. So I can help people figure out and help navigate. I may not have speed limit signs, but I can probably tell you where your caution signs and your stop signs are and your left turn here.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Speed limit signs wouldn't matter anyway because everyone's going at their own speed.
That's just it. I mean, I can't give you the speed limit because
Yeah.
everybody's going to have their own speed limit.
Yeah.
But I can probably tell you a lot of the different kind of things to go. I can help with resources. I can help with just different places to go, different people to talk to, how we got the help we did, and just a lot of the questions to ask. Because again, you're going to be elbow to elbow or shoulder to shoulder with somebody. It's just a matter of asking some questions, right? So
yeah. So what I heard most of the time through that kind of the underlying theme was don't isolate yourself.
Right.
Because if you do, then you're not making those connections. You're not getting the emotional support. You're not getting the educational support as far as, what can happen in a school system and then what can happen educationally, meaning, all this kind of stuff, the financial side of it, the living side of it, if a child goes through school with an IEP, the purpose of that IEP is to work with the child's unique needs to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And once they're out of the school system, finding those people that can help you with that portion of what the IEP prepared them for. And just having that, people who have been down the walk before you and who can, even if it's just one step further down the walk than you are, they can help make your step a little bit easier. That's kind of what I've been hearing the whole time. It's just having that support group, or not even a support group, just knowing that there are people out there that have, been down the road and trying to find them. And I think, Dennis, if you could not necessarily write a book, but if you could find the way to draw arrows so that everybody knows where they need to go to find the people that they need. Because I think a lot of these resources, like what I do, are out there. It just seems sometimes difficult to get the word to the person who needs it at that moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that key is. So if you can figure that out, you could retire from whatever you do because you could make millions of dollars, I think, doing that. But so thank you for being the first dad on #NoLimits and for helping your son and being willing to help others break through the financial problems or situations, not necessarily problems is the right word, that they may face as they grow older. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and leave a comment. If you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. And then join me here on Friday at 1 o'clock for Friday with Fran. And this week, Fran is at the Capitol building in Illinois, trying to get our legislators to figure out a different way to reach out to our families, our loved ones who have been quarantined that we can't have the interactions with. And then next week on #NoLimits, I will be talking with Holly. She is a military wife. They have moved several times and she has a child with an IEP, and she's going to talk to us about how you keep those limits from building up when you're moving from school district to school district, and the military sends your spouse off and you're suddenly a single parent, even though you're not a single parent. So thank you again, Dennis, so much for joining us. If you have any questions for him, just let me know and I'll be able to connect the two of you together. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks a lot.